Hi, this is Drew Jones of Drew's Guitar Shop in Seattle, Washington, and I wanted to do a brief video on nuts and how nuts pertain to setups. Basically talking about how to dial in a nut so that it is set up correctly, at least the nut portion of the setup. This is not going to be a complete setup video, so we're not going to be talking about neck relief or radius or string height at 12th fret or any of that stuff. We're just going to be focusing on this part down here. And the reason that I wanted to do this video is because this guitar here is a particularly egregious example of something that's very badly done. This one is actually the stock nut on this Fender Telecaster, and we can see this is a made in Mexico Tele. Now, usually I'm used to seeing the made in Mexico Teles up to a little bit of a higher standard than this, but I don't know, this one managed to slip through inspection or whatever, and we have the situation that we have here. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this up here, and I'm going to show you what I'm seeing, and maybe you will be able to see what I'm talking about before I bring up my illustrations. But if you see a difference in where this string is at here versus where this string is at here, that's actually a good thing, because you're seeing the string here that I just got done working on being different from the string that is in here in the same condition that the guitar was brought in with. So I'm going to come around here to this side and see if we can go ahead and disconnect the camera from my monopod here and bring you in so that you can really see. But yeah, there's quite a difference, and you see how deep that slot is over here for that high E string. That's quite a deep slot, and not something that you would really want to see on a nut that was appropriately cut. So I'm going to go ahead and put us back in the monopod here so the camera isn't shaking all over the place. And we're going to talk about some illustrations. So, I'm not an artist, so just please bear with me here as I bring up my terrible drawings. So, in an idyllic world, we're talking about a world where physics doesn't really apply in a real applied sense, but we're talking about like a theoretical physics world where materials don't wear down, and everything's perfect. Hope that makes sense. Your nut shouldn't be any higher than the frets. Your nut should be treated as another fret surface. So like your frets are leveled out, right? Like we spend a lot of time trying to make sure that the frets are level, and we have all of our devices like this guy to check on whether or not those frets are level. The same kind of thing would be applied to a nut slot in this case. So your nut slot ideally wouldn't let the string rest any higher or lower than the fret in front of it. Just like you wouldn't want the fret here to be any higher or lower than the fret in front of it. Otherwise you would end up with some kind of buzz somewhere, right? So this again is an ideal situation. However, this is not the reality of the situation, but let's go ahead and just keep that in mind, that the nut shouldn't be suspending the string any higher or lower than the fret in front of us. Let's use that as our starting point. What this guitar has more going on is this guy up here, where when fretting at the third fret, or the second fret, sorry, you have this enormous gap here between where the bottom of the string is and where that first fret is. And this is really, really problematic in some very important ways. The first way that the player's probably going to notice is in playability, just because this distance here is so far to travel, and there's so much stored tension back here right next to the nut, that is a hard place to put a lot of pressure, and you're going to need a lot of pressure in order to get this string to fret properly. So it's going to hurt your fingers, first of all, and it's going to be really, really uncomfortable to play. There's going to be a little bit of lag as you kind of get this delay where you're trying to push this down and it finally makes contact, and so it's just not really good for anything. But more than that, it's going to actually affect your intonation as well, because there's going to be all this stored tension back here. This is going to throw off where your intonation is dialed in, because your intonation, as far as what's dialed in at the bridge, is going to depend on the tension of the string and the height of the string. And so when you have some crazy thing like this going on, it's going to throw off both of those things, because it's going to create more tension here as you're pushing down, and it's also going to create more height. And so what's going to happen is this weird situation where your strings up in the first position, which are normally fairly well intonated on most instruments as long as the guitar has been set up and intonated correctly, are going to be the ones that are really, really off, because you're going to be dealing with this weird tension problem up here in first position. So let's go ahead and talk about what we want ideally in the real world, not this ideal, but sitting on the guitar bench. When I dial in a nut, what I like to see is when the string is making contact on the first fret, and obviously suspended here on the nut, that we have just a little space here, a little tiny bit of space. And the reason that we want a little bit of tiny bit of space here is because over time this nut is going to wear down, and so we want to give that some time so that it's some more time being useful before that string ends up kind of drifting down into that first fret and creating a nut buzz, which usually sounds like a kind of a sitar-y sort of sizzling sound, by the way, if you're curious what that particular issue might sound like. And as far as like what I'm looking for in this gap, it's really, really hard to say. I've had people actually ask me for numbers on this, and I hesitate to really give what a number would be, because I kind of do it by eye. But if I had to kind of guess, what I would say is that I want to see somewhere around like 10 thousandths of an inch. So somewhere between 10 thousandths and 20 thousandths of an inch, depending on the different string types and different string widths. So up here in the high E string, this would probably be more around like the 10K territory. And so what I would use for reference, if I was going to be carving into that nut slot to lower the string, I would actually be using the string itself, because the string itself is going to be usually like a 9 or a 10, which is 9 or 10 thousandths of an inch. So that's what I would use. I would just look at it and say, okay, well, is the gap underneath the string about the same width as the string? Well, then we're good, and we should stop. You should stop there and not go any further, because you'll risk blowing through and causing problems. As far as the radius goes, there's different schools of thought on this, from different people. My kind of opinion on this, and I'm sure that some people may disagree, is that you should have kind of a sort of offset matching radii as far as what this should look like. So if you drew here, you would have maybe somewhere off in this territory, two portions of a circle making contact, and then this portion over here would continue to get wider. And that's kind of what I would go for. So your high E is going to be dialed in closer than your low E. Each subsequent string is going to be climbing. Every single subsequent string from that high E is going to be climbing to the same height that you're going to leave your low E at. And your low E should be kind of more in the territory of like that, 15 to 20K. 20K is kind of heavy, but I think that, if you're just starting out, that would be a reasonable nut height to have. And the reason that you would do this is just because these strings are going to have greater or lower movement as they vibrate, whereas the high strings are going to have a little bit less movement than the low strings, and so you can get away with a little less height here than you can here, but you definitely want to keep it even so that the radius is relatively smooth going all the way across. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can lift up this guitar and kind of show you what it is that I'm seeing. This is going to be kind of difficult, and so you're going to have to bear with me if there's a little bit of shaky cam and some other stuff going on. And I'm sorry for my nails. It's been a really busy day, and I've been doing some sanding and stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch down here at the 3rd fret where you normally would fret the 3rd fret, but I'm actually looking at the string making contact on the 2nd. So I'm going to keep my pinky there on the 3rd fret position, and I'm going to go ahead and come up here to the 1st fret, and I'm going to tap. And you see that little bit of movement? That's what I want to see. That's about right. Just a tiny little bit of movement there. Whereas when we come over to the B string and we do the same thing, there's an awful lot of movement. You can see how much that is. And I would say that you wouldn't even have to measure that in thousandths of an inch. You could probably measure that in 30 seconds. It's quite high. And it really the camera here doesn't do justice. You can see the same thing here on the low E. But that's no bueno. You don't want to see that. So, I guess in summary, what I'm going to say is that it's really important to consider this nut height, and it's honestly, I think, one of the most crucial things as far as what a player is going to feel first when they go and pick up a guitar. If it's bad, it's going to feel bad, and it's going to play bad, and it's just not going to be good. And you know, if somebody can't quite put their finger on like why it's bad, you know, something like this could be a thing that's going on. You may have a nut that's a little high. This guitar here is an extreme example. Like this is really bad. I would consider something to be bad that is much less pronounced than what we have here. Because even just a little bit too much in terms of the string height at that nut is a lot. There's a lot of tension back here, and kind of you can demonstrate this by like coming back here behind the nut and just like, you know, pushing. So like if you're here, you put your finger down on that 1st fret and you can kind of feel, just kind of bounce your finger a little bit and feel how much tension there is, and then come back over here and kind of compare it. This is only just a little bit more tense than what you got over here. And so there's a lot of tension in there, so just a little bit goes a long way in terms of what it takes to make a difference there. So something like this definitely needs some work. Something less bad than this would also definitely need some work. And at the same time that we're worried about too much height, you also want to consider the alternative bad thing that can happen, which is too low. And so like if you're touching here and you see just a little bit of tenting here, or you're not seeing any gap at all, it's probably time to shim or to change out that nut that you have in the guitar, because that's not good either. You do kind of want this. This is kind of the golden area to be. You want just a little tiny little bit of something there between the bottom of the string and that 1st fret. So yeah, so I'll talk about some instances where I see this kind of often. When somebody buys a prefabricated nut on eBay or Amazon and they drop it in their guitar thinking that it's already going to be, you know, okay, like the measurements are already going to be okay. Well, the measurements might be okay, you know, this way. So if you're buying like a Graphtec nut or something and you're dropping it in your guitar, you know, it may fit side to side. You may have to, like, you know, trim and fit a little bit and think that that's good, but oftentimes the thing that's not good is the string height. You might get really lucky, and I've been in mostly in production settings where, you know, we have something that's made to fit the guitar that we're building, where you get really lucky and you can drop the nut in and it's just fine, it's perfect, no problem. But usually that's not the case. Usually, even with a prefab nut, you need to go in and you need to dial in these nut slots individually, and that is actually the most expensive, time-consuming, and dangerous part of the job. And I'll say that it is dangerous in two respects. One is that it's easy to blow through. This is one of the most frustrating places for new novice luthiers to work on, because it is so easy just to take one file stroke too many there and go too low, at which point you've blown through the nut and you need to replace it, carve a new one, start over again, it's done. And the other thing, as far as a more expensive repair, is that these slots need to be angled. And if you see where my file is pointed, because these, again, need to be angled, you see that it is kind of pointed at the headstock. And so another really popular thing that I see happen with novice luthiers is that they'll go to carve these nut slots, which really just needs to be done in the guitar. There's not really another way to do it, unfortunately, because you do need this reference point here. And they'll dig into the headstock with the file, which is really bad. It's finish repair, and it just looks gross. It's hard to fix. Oftentimes it goes down deep into the wood, and it can happen even without somebody noticing, because you're concentrating so much here and just got your tunnel vision going on that you're not seeing the damage that you're doing to the headstock, which is something that occurs quite often, and I do want to stress that for people who want to try this at home. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about getting a new nut, when you're looking at the nut on a guitar that you're intending on buying, or when you're in the process of doing setups and you're wanting to know what to look for in terms of your nut portion of your setup, as I was saying earlier at the intro to the video. So we've already gone about 17 minutes here, and this is just this part of a setup. I'm not even talking about the neck, I'm not talking about the string radius, and I'm not talking about like dialing the pickups in and getting your intonation correct, or the countless other variables that can come into doing a setup on a guitar. This is one of the reasons why I would usually be kind of suspect of some setup videos that I've seen on YouTube that are very, very short, too short in my opinion to really cover the bases in terms of giving a really full account of what needs to happen, what can go wrong, etc., etc. This is just this part here, so you can imagine how things get more complicated as we move further down the guitar and start working on other stuff. So anyway, I've probably left some stuff out. I will probably think of them as soon as I stop recording the video. And if I do, I might put those down in the description. In the description you can also find my website and my contact information at the website in case you are in the Seattle area and you want any repair work, or happen to have a guitar that you're interested in buying. I also have lots of other YouTube videos on my channel that are kind of along the same vein, just helpful stuff for people who are interested in learning stuff. And I have a Patreon, so if you found this helpful and you want to toss me a little tip, that would be cool too. This has been Drew Jones of Drew's Guitar Shop in Seattle, Washington. Thanks for watching.